I suspect the
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. US-Russia find no compromise on key territory issue after Ukraine talks. Kremlin says the Ukraine talks with US useful, but a lot of work ahead. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says unlimited support for Ukraine is unrealistic, stressing for measured assistance, while US President Donald Trump adds the US will continue sending weapons if Europe contributes. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia does not seek war with European powers, but is ready to fight if Europe pursues a direct conflict. He also accuses Europe of blocking US President Donald Trump's Ukraine peace efforts. French President Emmanuel Macron is set to arrive in China. He is expected to put pressure on his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping to help secure a ceasefire in Ukraine and discuss trade relations. US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth says the US has only just begun targeting alleged drug trafficking boats, defending US strikes amid criticism. Pentagon insists operations are legal under US and international law. US President Donald Trump says he held a very productive call with Brazil's President Lula discussing trade sanctions and joint efforts against organized crime as both leaders seek to deepen economic cooperation and strategic ties. The Trump administration has halted immigration applications from nationals of 19 countries already facing US travel restrictions, with the US CIS saying processing delays are necessary to protect national security. US Ambassador to the UN Mike Waltz to visit Israel with Israeli counterpart next week. The two will be in the country from December 8 to 10. And viewers, French President Emmanuel Macron is set to begin a 3-day state visit to China, focusing on trade and diplomatic relations. Macron aims to strengthen economic ties, advocating for fair and reciprocal market access, while also seeking to attract more Chinese investment and boost French exports. Key sectors for cooperation include energy, food, and aviation. In addition to trade talks, Macron will press Chinese President Xi Jinping to influence Russia toward a ceasefire in Ukraine. Paris expects China to refrain from providing Russia with support to continue the war. During the visit, Macron will also participate in a France-Chinese business forum and visit key cultural sites. And I now want to welcome Professor Rohan Gunaratna, international affairs expert, joining us live from Singapore into the discussion here.
It's very good to see you.
All right. Thank you, Professor Gunaratna, for joining us. Now, even as we discuss this, Macron has in fact arrived in China, and the visuals on our screens show how he is said to be welcomed by the Chinese authorities there. But let's talk about this. Macron comes to China right after meeting with Zelensky, and he is expected to push China to side for peace, but we all know how China has been supplying to Russia in its war efforts. What impact is this visit really going to have on the peace negotiations?
China has provided very significant capabilities to Russia, particularly what you call the dual user technologies that has in fact given an added capability to Russia to mount operations against Ukraine. So Macron's appeal to the Chinese is to persuade Russia to embrace peace, because right now the demands that Putin is making is such that neither the Europeans, even the American mediators, are puzzled by it. So what is important is that both these leaders build goodwill so that China will be able to move Russia towards uh, uh, a position where both these parties, that is the Europeans and the Russians, with the mediation of the United States, will resolve this conflict without further loss of lives. Otherwise, this conflict will protract and there will be fatalities, casualties, and asset losses on both sides.
And what should we expect from Xi Jinping? Is he expected to concede to Macron's efforts?
Xi Jinping is a very pragmatic leader. He will firstly work with France with regard to strengthening the ties with France, especially on matters of trade, because there's a very significant movement on the part of the French entrepreneurs, the business community, to strengthen their trade agreements and French exports and facilitate access for French exports. So I think that what is going to happen is that in the fields of energy, food industry, and aviation sector, there will be very significant um, investment efforts. And of course, France and China will work together. Of course, there is some concern about these developments on the part of the Americans and other Europeans. But France is determined to build this close cooperation with the Chinese. There's also a trade deficit with China when it comes to the 27 nation bloc, over 300 billion euros last year. So China alone represents 46% of France's total trade deficit. So I believe that there will be also movement in this direction. It's a good visit because multipolarity is something that is happening whether we like it or not. And of course, now we are seeing France working not only with the Americans and fellow Europeans, UK, but also with China.
Now, the message that Macron is expected to deliver is not an easy one, both as far as war is concerned, as far as trade is concerned. You know, there's a lot of pressure on trade security and diplomatic ties. Uh, do stress to us about some of the key talking points in their bilateral meetings and any likely outcome.
One is that Macron will advocate for an agenda of cooperation in economic and trade matters aimed at achieving a balance that ensures sustainable, solid growth that benefits everyone. So I think that Macron is also understands President Xi Jinping's pragmatic thinking, and he will want to work with France. This will also set a trend for other European countries. So I think France, as a very important player in continental Europe, will pave the way for working with China. Of course, the Russians either will become more isolated, or of course, Russia will be compelled in many ways to resolve the dispute with Ukraine. So I think that overall, this is a very positive visit. France and China celebrated their very long cooperation, a diplomatic anniversary last year. So I think that this visit is seen as advancing French and Chinese cooperation, but it is something that should be encouraged and that's something that is positive for global stability because there's more relationship between these countries, then the chance of going to war, chance of disputes, conflicts will recede.
All right, Mr. Gunratna, Professor, I also want to draw your attention to the fact how Macron's visit is coming after Ursula von der Leyen's in July, and after that visit, she said that ties between China and European Union are at an inflection point. So the timing of Macron's visit is crucial here. How do you assess this?
Whether we like it or not, China is emerging as an economic superpower, and China cannot be isolated. And the Europeans understand it, and the Europeans want to work with the Chinese. Europeans have very serious issues with the Russians, but eventually, what is important is for global stability, global peace, and harmony, there should be such ties. I think at the end of the day, leaders are less ideological. They are more keen to look at how governments can work together so that we will have a peaceful world, a stable world, because Europe has suffered a lot because of the war with Russia. Although the Russians are incessantly attacking Ukraine and Ukrainians are attacking Russia, the bigger problem is that the Europeans, especially NATO, build up their capabilities on Russia's border on the European side. So I think there must be a great understanding between these countries. And I think more there is a trade and more there is investment, the probability for conflict will diminish.
All right. Well, thank you for your comments there and helping us with that perspective. But do stay on. There's some more development coming in. Now, viewers, ahead of NATO meeting in Brussels, Estonian Foreign Minister Nargus Sahakna says that Estonia will send troops to Ukraine should security guarantees for the country include a peace force. He also emphasized that neither Putin nor US will make any decisions for Europe, and only they as a whole will decide what they are going to do in Europe. Now, NATO foreign ministers are gathering at the alliance's headquarters in Brussels to discuss alliance priorities and security issues, notably the war in Ukraine. Let's have a look at what minister had said.
So, of course, Estonian position is clear that Ukraine position and future will be in NATO, but probably it doesn't happen right now, though we must decide as a coalition of the willing, together with US, to give the security guarantees, what means that Europe must put the skin in the game. It means the boots in the ground, if there is need for that. Estonian government already in March this year decided that if there is a need, and this with the formation of the coalition of the willing security guarantees, boots on the ground, we will participate. Even we are the neighboring country and a small country to Russia, and we are the front line of the east to NATO. But we must understand that if we can keep the peace in Ukraine, then we are securing Europe as well.
Be ready to go at war against Europe if necessary. What do you make of such comments?
We must actually decide what we are going to do in Europe. Putin cannot decide over us. And as well, US cannot make decisions instead of us.
How can you make sure that the US is seriously taking?
We have lots of leverages. We need to support Ukraine, but you're right. We don't know exactly what is happening in Moscow and during these negotiations. Let's hear our Ukraine friends.
All right, and we now request Professor Gunaratna to join us back into the discussions here. Professor Gunaratna, very strong statement coming in from Estonian Foreign Minister, on US and Russian interference at a time when they are discussing the peace plan. Now, very important to note here how he's talking about sending weapons to Ukraine. Now, this is following Trump's statement where he says that US will only send weapons if Europe does. Now, a voice coming in from Europe to that effect. Should we expect Ukraine's war efforts strengthening?
The idea of sending peacekeepers to Ukraine came from Estonia in August of 2025. So it's not a new idea. In fact, at that time, the Estonian Prime Minister said he will send just one company of peacekeepers to Ukraine. Of course, it's very small, one company. But what is important is the fact that he's keen to do it. But the statement that the American and the Russian, their statements and their views are not going to determine the future of Ukraine, it is false, because you must understand, if not for President Trump, this war would have escalated many folds of what we are witnessing today. So whether people like Trump or not, the US intervention was very timely. The United States president spent time with Putin, sent several messages to Putin, sent his advisors, even most recently to meet with Putin. So I think that the American input to this should be welcome, and it is something that is praiseworthy because the Europeans can't handle Putin. Second is, of course, the Europeans must understand that this conflict with Russia is largely created because of the NATO buildup in the border on the European side of Russia, military buildup. And this is a bigger dispute. It's not just Ukraine. If this war escalates, it's going to spread to the rest of Europe. So it is better for the European leaders to be more humble and to work with the Americans and with the Russians to resolve this dispute before its escalation.
Professor Gunratna, I'll come back to you on that point. There's some remarks coming in from Norwegian foreign ministers as well. Let's tell our viewers that, and then I'll come back to you. Now, viewers, let's also tell you that Norway's foreign minister, Espen Barth, has confirmed that Norway, in partnership with other Nordic and Baltic states, is going to contribute a $500 million package for Ukraine to purchase US military equipment. Though this is not a direct pledge from the foreign minister for the full 500 million euros package, but a contribution to a collective initiative. Norway will provide 2 billion Norwegian kroner, which is approximately 172.3 million euros, the largest portion of this package. Let's look at that statement.
Norway today will announce an additional $500 million for Pearl programs, distributed in two packages, one together with Germany and Poland and one together with Germany and the Netherlands, because this is really a moment to ramp up support for Ukraine. They need to be able to negotiate from a position of strength.
All right, I now request Professor Gunratna to join us back. You heard that statement, Europe are now gathering support, providing capital to buy US weapons for Ukraine. What's your assessment?
So this is nothing new, although the quantum of funds that the Norwegians are giving to the Americans for procuring the latest weapons is something new. Historically, Norway has provided Ukraine with a range of military equipment, that is anti-tank weapons, air defense systems, and also ammunition. But of course, the quantum of support, and this time we are seeing largely American purchasers. So this is to ensure that Ukraine does not fall, doesn't collapse. So European support for Ukraine at this point, whether it is in the form of peacekeepers, whether in terms of weaponry for defense and offense, is something that will ensure that Russians will have a very tough time fighting Ukraine. Because at this point, basically President Putin has rejected the proposal that Witkoff and Kushner brought to Moscow. There's no real agreement, although things have been articulated, packaged in a very nice way. The real problem, the real issue is that there is a huge challenge of Ukrainian security, Ukrainian strength.
All right, I'll let you go with that, and thank you, Professor Gunratna, for joining us and sharing your perspective. With that, first, we now shift our focus and move on to some more news from the European Union, which is entering what it calls a new era of energy independence from Russia. European Union Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced that the bloc will completely cut Russian gas imports by autumn 2027, marking a major shift away from reliance on Moscow's fossil fuels. Let's listen.
Today is indeed a historic day for our union. Last night, we reached a provisional agreement on the Commission's proposal to fully phase out Russian fossil fuels. We're turning that page, and we're turning it for good. This is the dawn of a new era, the era of Europe's full energy independence from Russia. Many believe this would be impossible. Well, the figures speak for themselves, and let me give you some. Today, Russian gas imports, so LNG and pipeline, are down from 45% at the beginning of the war to 13%. Coal imports are down from 51% at the beginning of the war to now 0%. And crude oil imports are down from 26% to 2% today. I always knew that we could deliver with unity, with resolve, and by building on the extraordinary work of the past 3 years.
Meanwhile, Belgian concerns are rising over an European Union plan to find a loan for Ukraine using frozen Russian assets. Belgian Foreign Minister warned that the proposal does not adequately address the risks facing his country and is calling for more safeguards to be included. And now we move on to news from the Honduran, where Honduran opposition presidential candidate Salvador Nasrallah has told supporters that he is currently leading in the country's tight general election. Addressing a cheering crowd in the capital, Nasrallah has said that despite what he described as numerous obstacles in the voting process, his campaign was ahead in the preliminary count.
2017 como representante del partido de Juan Orlando Hernández. A pesar de todo eso, tenemos una ventaja en este momento de 2.380. Para exigir que a más tardar mañana miércoles 3 de diciembre se diga quién es el presidente electo.
And joining us live in the discussion is Shruti Dasgupta, International Affairs expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you, Shruti, for joining us once again here at NewsX World into this discussion here. Now, crucial developments taking place in Honduras. A Trump-backed candidate is losing lead.
Yes, you're right. Asfura is not doing as well in the preliminary countings as has been happening, and Nasrallah is leading, which shows that probably the people of Honduras are not really happy with Trump dictating the terms of who gets elected and who doesn't, because it's a slippery slope. Once you let a foreign national, foreign president decide whether your candidate has their approval or not, and if a particular candidate is not selected, the country as a whole would face cutting off of aid. It makes Honduras an extension of USA. It just becomes another state of USA rather than being an independent nation with their own thinking and democratic body. So the people may, as of now, if this current lead turns into a victory, it shows that the people have rejected the interference of a foreign government through threats or declarations or any other format into their own democratic process. Beyond that, I do know that there is a significant drug problem in Honduras, which both Hernandez, who has been pardoned by Trump, as well as Castro, who's the current leader of Honduras, both of them have been unable to stop the drug transit, which is by the UN report itself designated as a primary transit corridor, which allows Bolivian, Colombian, and Peruvian drugs to flow from the point of origin through Mexico to USA. So in the Northern America continent as a whole, Honduras is a point of transit, and a large part of it flows through it. Both the governments have been unable to stop this particular problem. The gangs have their people in place in both of these. Hernandez's brother was the reason why Hernandez was, by the way, convicted in 2024 in Biden era, but he was accused in 2018 and in 2019 during Trump 1.0. The entire investigation into Hernandez had begun. So Trump's allegation that this is completely framed up is not correct. It was happening while in his regime, during US's legal procedures of trying to stop the influx of drugs into its nation. So that particular problem is there. So his brother is complicit. The current leader, Castro, his family and brother-in-law are complicit. So the political regime is compromised no matter which one you choose. So if the regime is compromised, at least let's pick a candidate that is not going to dance to the tunes of another president. And probably this lead is a reflection of that. If the situation changes, then it might also prove that Honduras needs more aid and support from USA, and people have accepted that they would rather side with USA and hope for the best than have their own political parties rule however which way they do for the past 2 decades now almost. And beyond that, I also know that this problem with drugs stays whether they want it or not, but the UN has opened up a separate office for it after its latest report, and the United Kingdom's under the Castro regime is ready to fund the new operations to counter the flow of drugs. So it's not as if this organization or even the previous one didn't do it, but there is a geopolitical strategy behind it. Asfuro has promised that he will take Honduras away from Chinese-leaning inclinations as a leftist organization, from him being a right-wing politician. He is willing to lean towards Israel and USA. So for me, I think Trump's role in it, Honduras' political problems are more of a geopolitical struggle between the right wing and the left wing, as in USA versus China.
Shrutina, Trump has also put out a comment on his Truth Social where he says that looks like Honduras is trying to face the results of the presidential election, and if they do, there will be hell to pay. Do you think his Honduras gamble now hangs in balance?
It does, because US will pull off aid. You've seen what happens when one nation challenged. We are witnessing a world where Venezuela is arming itself to protect its own political interests against a very aggressive USA. You're witnessing Mexico trying to find the middle ground without actually coming into a border skirmish, where USA is posturing very aggressively against Mexico and the drug-related issues on that. So we are seeing a world where USA, in the name of countering drugs, narcotics, is trying to dictate terms to various nations. So Honduras has this particular lead would probably is a scare tactic, which might actually turn into a policy. We don't know with Trump, it can actually turn into a policy very, very fast. And that will not reflect well on USA, because it shows that they, despite what Tulsi Gabbard claimed, that regime change operations and other interferences into foreign nations, politically it was a Biden era thing, is no longer going to be a Trump era thing. We see a different, more aggressive way of interfering in politics in the nations that are not US vassals. So I think they will have to pay for it, I'm sure. Trump is very good at cornering. They'll pull off aid, they'll put sanctions, they'll pull out trade, they'll start attacking your vessels, exactly like how they've done for Venezuela. These are various pressure tactics. And with a small nation, with a small army, you can't really do much when USA turns around and decide to bite you.
So what option does it have then when US pulls off aids?
We have, just like I've been asking, the international body to step in and hold USA accountable for these statements, for these actions, for these sanctions. How USA deals with other nations is USA's problems, but once they try and step out of their own national boundaries to dictate terms, the UN should sit up and take notice, and not just UN, other nations as well, the European nations, the Western nations, the new power circles, the BRICS. These are the newer establishments that need to come out and speak and show that it is not USA's world. They are not, they cannot pull off their hegemonical, colonial, financial, neocolonialism into the world, into modern world today. So I'm hoping that the international community comes forth and asks exactly what Trump is thinking when he's making these statements or policies.
All right, thank you, Shruti, for your comments there. I'd let you go with that. Viewers, we now move on. There's news from Hong Kong, where mourners have gathered near the devastated Wang Fuk Court Towers to grieve the loss of at least 156 in the city's deadliest fire in decades. Residents laid flowers and offerings at the site as members of the police disaster victim identification unit continued their work in the charred remains of the complex. Nearly 30 people still remain missing, and authorities have warned that recovery efforts in the worst affected areas could take weeks. Police have arrested 15 people on suspicion of manslaughter in a criminal inquiry into the tragedy, and 12 have also been arrested in a corruption investigation. Meanwhile, listen into what the mourning residents have to say.
我觉得这么多人没有了家，接受不了。比如说我在想象，如果是我的家庭没有了老公，没有了女儿，我不知道我怎么还能不能活下去。我就觉得现在最主要的就是他平复一下大家的心情，失去了亲人，失去了家，什么都没有了，一个人孤零零的活在这个世上，没有了盼头怎么办？不是说要捐多少钱给他们，主要的我觉得是心里的这个创伤很难平复的。这是
希望佢去咗人安息啦。在生嘅人嚟計，望佢哋勇敢啲咯，面對咯。終歸嚟計，我俾啲祝福仲係在生嗰啲人咯。至於死咗嘅人嘅，一路好走咯。終歸講嚟講去4個字，就係慘絕人寰。
Let's track some news from Sri Lanka. Floods as well. Cyclone Ditwa has left devastating damage across the country, claiming 410 lives and causing the worst flooding the region has seen in a decade. In Gampola, repairsman BSO Vikram Singhe surveys the destruction of his electronics shop, with floodwaters destroying much of his inventory. The storm's impact has been felt across Southeast Asia, with hundreds of deaths in Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand. In Sri Lanka, 336 remain missing, while more than 1 million people have been affected by the storm. And that's all we have time for. Do keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.